Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Cooperative Owners for Solar webinar this evening. I'm Amy McMorrow-Hunter from the Climate Economy Education, Inc., and that's www.theclimateeconomy.com. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit for education on lifestyles and business models that are good for the climate, economy, and humanity. And tonight we're going to have Shannon Fulton and Shariff Shakir talking about net metering and legacy systems, right? I'm going to hand it over to you guys. Take it away.
Thanks, Amy. I'll share my screen, and I hope that the audio is okay. My husband is cooking right here, so I hope it's not too loud. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, very well. So this is the first module of, I believe, 5 deeper dive modules where we're going from a broader view of the high level, both issues and opportunities in cooperatives for solar owners. And specifically, we're looking at these issues in Southwest Electric Co-op and Southeast Illinois Electric Co-op. However, the issues that we're talking about apply to many other co-ops throughout the state. So this particular module is focused on net energy metering and legacy systems. Now, Amy, with the climate economy, it has been very gracious to be able to facilitate these conversations. We really appreciate her involvement and her ability to reach people who want to make change on this topic. And the other 5 companies that have come together downstate Illinois to provide some education for solar owners are AES Solar, which Shariff Shakir is a member of AES Solar down in Carterville. EFS Solar, Paul, sorry?
McKnight.
I'm sorry, Paul McKnight with EFS Solar. And then I'm Shannon Fulton with StraightUp Solar. Craig Powles with TikTok Energy, and Michelle Knox with Wind Solar USA. And Shariff and I are providing the presentation on this topic, and the other representatives will be helping with other topics down the road. So as a review, as members of an electric co-op, you all know or may know by now that an electric cooperative is owned by its members, the members, and the members are also consumers. A cooperative operates as a nonprofit and on a nonprofit and cost of service basis. And it operates according to 7 cooperative principles, not just for electric utilities, but for all cooperatives that call themselves co-ops, whether it's a worker co-op or a grocery co-op or any different type of co-op. They adhere to 7 cooperative principles. And they're a key reason that the electric cooperatives operate differently from other electric co-ops like Ameren and ComEd, that those utilities are investor-owned utilities. They have a group of investors that their performance meets fees, frankly. However, a co-op exists to serve its members. So I mentioned the different issues in electric co-ops that we're talking about. The 2 that we're going to discuss, as I mentioned tonight, are net energy metering valuation and legacy system treatment. The other 3, net energy metering, grid penetration thresholds, the insurance requirements, and this concept of the myth of cross-subsidization will be addressed in future presentations, and we will remind folks of the dates of those presentations coming up. We'll talk about that at the end of tonight's presentation. So to get started on net metering, just to give a basic overview of what net metering is and how it works, is at a high level, net metering is the accounting process for tracking energy that your solar electric system exports as surplus back to the grid. And tracking that export and also placing a value on it. Okay, so when energy is exported to the grid, the utility tracks that kilowatt hour, the unit of energy that is exported to the grid, and assigns a value to it. And there are various cost methods by which utilities assign a value to that kilowatt hour. In investor-owned utility territory, at least with Ameren and Commonwealth Edison, for residential net metering, when overproduction occurs during the day and you export energy to the grid, those kilowatt hours are banked. They're recorded and banked. And they're banked at the full retail rate. So that includes your cost for solar, or your cost for energy supply, plus delivery or transmission. So that's called full retail net metering. It's a one-to-one credit. So whatever you're paying for your energy by the kilowatt hour unit is the credit value that you get as a surplus unit on your next month's bill, and it's credited by the energy unit. So as your costs go up or down, that energy unit value goes with it. Okay, and one additional benefit with net metering and investor-owned utilities is that there is an annual true-up period where you get to bank energy that you might export as surplus during the summer and use those kilowatt hour surpluses throughout the winter when your system isn't producing as much energy. And there is an option to choose as your true-up date, your 12-month true-up date of either April 30th, it's actually March 30th, it's April 1st, or November 30th, October 1st. And that allows, so October would be a better true-up date if you had distributed wind. But April 1st is the date that we use for solar. And it makes sense, right? So you can overproduce in the summer months, use that energy up through the winter and spring, and then come April, you will ideally have used up all of your excess solar energy. So that's a really conducive net metering policy that encourages people to go solar. So this methodology, or this policy, is according to current legislation, law. This net metering policy in Ameren and ComEd stays in place. This full retail net metering stays in place until each utility reaches 5% net energy metering threshold, which means once the total capacity, demand capacity of Ameren's customers, once 5% of that total is net metered by solar customers, that's the point at which the policy changes from full retail net metering to supply value only net metering. And the delta is replaced by a smart inverter rebate, a locational rebate. And on an investor-owned utility, incidentally, their distributed generation size limitation that receives this full retail net metering benefit is 2 megawatts AC. So generally in electric co-ops, however, there are some differences. Now, these are high-level general differences among many co-ops. They aren't the same for every co-op, but generally speaking, individual boards, a board for a co-op determines these policies. And often there is significant influence upon these policies by the larger suppliers that supply them energy. Very few co-ops, if any, in Illinois, maybe one. Very few produce their own energy. They all contract with enter into long-term contracts with suppliers or generators of energy. And most often the reconciliation period for net metering it's either annual, it can be quarterly, it can be monthly. It varies across the board. Or it can be real time, similar to what Southwest Electric Co-op is currently. And that threshold, remember we talked about the 5% AMRA net metering threshold that's in law currently. That threshold for these for co-ops can vary anywhere from 1 to 5%, and it's arbitrary. There's really no indication as to how they determine that net metering threshold. Frankly, AMRA's is arbitrary too. And then in cooperatives, there are sizing limits much lower than what we have available in an industrial utility territory. And they range anywhere from 10 kilowatts to 50 kilowatts. So that means that anything above those system sizes gets a reduced value for their net metering. And you have to enter into an agreement with the co-op supplier. It can be pretty complicated. So with respect to net metering policies, at specifically the two co-ops that we're talking about directly, Southwest Electric Co-op and Southeastern Illinois Electric Co-op, are related to their real-time reconciliation versus retail banking net metering. What that means is that anytime a system exports a kilowatt hour, that kilowatt hour is assigned a value at that time and then becomes unavailable for banking. They don't allow you to bank and then use up the excess kilowatt hours through the winter months. They just basically pay you out on the next month's bill at that lower wholesale rate. So this is even lower than their retail supply rate. So we're talking often from a full retail net metered value in Ameren of something like, let's just say 11 cents, 10 cents per kilowatt hour value compared to a wholesale rate value of closer to 3 cents in an electric co-op in this instance where they have real-time net reconciliation. So there's a big swing between neighbors often as to what they're getting for their credits. And again, there's no banking in that situation. So not only does this make the payback and the cash gain and the savings scenario for going solar much less interesting to people, it's also very hard to model this instant crediting, this real-time crediting, because unless you have detailed interval data or like real-time smart metering data for a customer over the past year, for example, you don't really know their energy usage patterns. You know how much a customer might use per month, but you don't know within that month how that energy is used. You don't have a more specific profile against which you can model real-time netting. So it's a challenge to get it right. And frankly, real-time crediting at a wholesale rate attributes less value to that kilowatt hour than it really represents. And smaller residential users are more negatively affected by this rate structure than large, because larger energy users in most cases, won't export as much energy as smaller homeowners. And it just frankly disincentivizes the interest in all of the benefits that come along with an increase in renewable energy. So let's look at the numbers briefly here. So if we consider the same almost 9 kilowatt system, which is pretty common system size for residential homeowners, if we consider this system, all else remaining equal, and look at a few key performance indicators, the energy production value over 10 years, the cash gain over 25 years, and I have an asterisk by that because there's additional note I want to make there, and then payback or cost recovery. You can see a significant difference between Ameren and Southwest Electric Co-op, right? So in Ameren, this is just general modeling, 10 years of energy production value for that system would be nearly $17,000 savings. And in Southwest, not savings, the value of that energy would be $17,000. And in SWEC, it's much lower at $7,000 because you're only valuing that energy produced at that low wholesale rate. In terms of the cash gained over 25 years, you can see a really marked difference as well. 46,500 to 9,300. And the point I wanted to make here is that assumes that you maintain the same value of that kilowatt hour in real-time export over the 25 years. We don't, it's really difficult and impossible to know what the co-op will do with that wholesale rate value. It could go up, it probably will go up, but they could also change their policy again. And secondly, co-ops have been increasingly limiting the length of time that a system can even benefit from net metering. So this cash gained over 25 years assumes that you can have net metering over 25 years. Many co-ops are limiting that to once they hit that threshold of 1 to 5%, cutting people off after a few years. So that's a little bit variable as to even whether that $9,300 is legit, right? And then the payback is considerable, 3 times increased length in the payback between SWEC and Ameren. Question, and we can stop throughout. They have no chance to get Ameren. That's right. That's right, Amy. People don't have a choice. Like that's the other thing. They don't have a choice to switch like suppliers, like individuals and investor-owned utilities can. If a customer in Ameren utility service territory thought that Ameren charged too much for their kilowatt hour supply, they can find another supplier really easily. They still have to pay Ameren to distribute the energy, but they can pay someone else a lower rate for the kilowatt hours. Illinois deregulated the power market, I believe back in the early 90s, and that created a much more competitive market, but it only applies to the investor-owned utility service territories. You get what you get when you live in co-op territory. So some of the recommendations that we would, make to the board and would encourage solar owners to make to the board are, hey, instead of monthly or quarterly true-up, can we do an annual true-up where you can bank your credits throughout the winter months or use them up in the winter months, bank in the summer and use them up in the winter. And by the way, the value of the kilowatt hour that you produce and put onto the grid so that your neighbor can use it is much more than just a low avoided rate of 3 cents. Let's make it a full retail value. That's what it's worth. And end the true-up period April 1 and establish a cap that's understandable to people. you know, for the co-op to say, hey, we're going to cut off net metering when we hit 2% means nothing to anybody. Even the co-op, I would say, doesn't know when they're going to hit that, right? So if they say, hey, we're going to cut off net metering or change it in some way when we hit X number of megawatts or gigawatts, that's the point at which it will change, and then report to people quarterly as to where they are against that threshold. That's something useful. That's useful information. So, Shariff, I think I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce yourself, please, and talk through the legacy system.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. So a legacy system in a co-op is one where the system is in place and the their payback policy changes. So they change from, I know the two examples here don't have net metering, but if they were changed to net metering, or there's other policies and ways for them to handle the distributed generation. When they change it, what happens? Right now, legacy are those members who already have gone solar at the current policy, as long as they own their system, or for a minimum of 25 years. Next slide. There we go. The question is what happens to them? And unfortunately, unless there's a policy in place that says this is what we're going to do in the future, for instance, when we hit our net metering cap, everybody's going to go to X, Y, or Z. It's really up to the board at the time of the decision. Three things can really occur. One is legacy systems get to keep their current policy. This change can be temporary. They could make the change to another policy at any point in time. That's a distinction from number two, which is that legacy systems get a period of time with the old policy and then we'll go to new. I have a case study with what happened with Egyptian Electric recently that was exactly that. Or the most likely is that a legacy system will adopt the new policy immediately. Next slide. Yeah. So Egyptian Electric was a case study that very recently they switched from net metering. They were one of the only co-ops in my territory that had it. They had full net metering, and then they made a switch, and they were going to match the policies in the other co-op areas. They're all in a conglomerate off of the Southern Illinois Power Cooperative, at least in my territory, and it kind of made sense for them to. I was surprised when they had net metering, but they did it in the following way, which was number two in the previous slide, is they made an announcement about the switch. They made a deadline to define a legacy system. So they said anybody who already has a system in place, or if it's going to be a new system, you have to have your application in the next month, and it has to be installed within a month after that, and energized, witness test, all done. And then those are all legacy systems. They get 5 years of net metering. And then after that, no one gets net metering. Everybody's going to have what we refer to as net billing, where you purchase at a rate, and then anything that hits the grid gets pushed back to the grid, gets some rate. Currently, it's like 3.6 cents with them. So that means that somebody who just bought a system, who expected to see a 9-year payback or sometime between 5 and 10 years, is going to have an altered payback because they're going to have 5 years of the net metering that they expected. And then those remaining 4 years are going to be longer for it. So their payback period, their financial decision changed because the board changed their mind. As an installer, we were relieved that we got the heads up and were able to get a few people their systems net metering for 5 years, but it was one of those things where it's not a great thing that was happening, but we were happy that we got the notice. Next slide. So the impact for photovoltaic owners, reality is with the change being possible, I can tell you what it might look like now with the limitations that Shannon identified of real time, but I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. Even if your system doesn't have net metering, let's say they can change the rate of buyback, and there are actually less advantageous models that they could do. They could go to a buy all, sell all, which means that you buy everything from them and then you sell everything you produce to them. So none of your solar produced energy has full retail value. And I've even seen even worse than that in other territories where, to get financial benefit from the kilowatt hours that hit the grid, you have to actually pay into a system. So it's really disadvantageous, and there's no telling what's going to happen. I'm going to look at this question real quick. I think I'm going to let Shannon field that one in a second. So the question is, and maybe I can touch on a little bit. Yeah, so in October, Ameren believed they hit their 5% threshold and quickly tried to lower the net metering rates for new solar customers. They were audited and reversed their net metering change back to full. Not sure of the current, I don't know what the current status of the 5% threshold is either. And Ameren is, yeah, it gives you the impression that Ameren's doing it because they're forced. Yeah, they're because they're a public utility and not a co-op, there is language for them. And I do not believe the 5% rule applies to co-ops. They are regulated by FERC and NERC, two different organizations. Shannon, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. The current status, I think they're a little over 3% right now because they were forced to calculate it in a more accurate way by the ICC. They are appealing that, by the way. It has gone to the court system and they are appealing that. So more to come on that. But they are doing net metering. It's regulated for sure. They're required to do it. And that 5% threshold, like I said, was arbitrary. And this will be, well, I can't say it will be, but energy legislation in play currently attempts to change that threshold and address net metering transition in a different way. I think no one expects that full retail net metering will be here forever. No one expects that. But what we need to understand is what that transition will look like. And we need to be able to know what that transition will look like ahead of time. Not like 5%, here we go. So yes, the legislation in play does address the Ameren issue, but not requirements for co-ops. There is some oversight language in CEJA and PAP. I think PAP included it too, PAP 100. But CEJA for sure added some oversight language for co-ops and municipal utilities requiring that they go through a planning process that's made public. There's only so far they can go with that, but it's a little bit of a, hey, develop your renewable energy plan in a public hearing type of manner so that people can provide input. But that's as far as they can go because, as Shariff said, they're regulated differently.
And that's my last point on this slide was, you know, without this pre-planning of this is where we are, this is what happens when this threshold's hit, I got to go with what's happening today when I present financials, and it just makes it more challenging. So what can a co-op member do? Get involved. Get involved in your co-op. Read the bylaws. Go to meetings. Vote. Get a board position. Run for that. I know it's not the easiest thing to do, but it's an option that you have as a member. And the other thing is when they change it, energy storage is a possibility. It saves the energy instead of sending it back to the grid, and then you get to use it later at the full value of the energy. So essentially, you're net metering yourself to the size of the battery. Batteries are at the financial tipping point where it really starting to make sense to do it, even just from the value of the energy that you wouldn't send back to the grid. I advise all of our clients to strongly consider making sure their system is energy storage ready for the future. It's future-proofing your system because it's going to get to a point where that makes a whole lot of sense to do. And it'll hit the co-op where it hurts. So the discussion and next webinar trainings, May 12th, we're going to explore co-op solar system limitations. The 19th, we're going to look at the value of solar in the co-op utility territories. It's actually beneficial. Spoiler. May 26th, the hurdles and hoops of solar system insurance. And then June 2nd, who's really subsidizing who? That's always complained is, hey, we're subsidizing your solar system, but maybe it's the other way around.
Yeah, thanks, Shariff.